Mr. Moretti, Mommy told me to give you this letter if she ever disappeared, the 3-year-old boy whispered, holding out a crumpled cream envelope. The Mafia boss froze. His name was Alessandro Moretti. At 38, he sat at the head of the oldest Italian crime family still standing in New York. The Moretti name controlled the docks of Brooklyn, 3 of the largest hotels on the Manhattan skyline, a construction empire that had poured half the concrete under Lower Fifth Avenue, and shadow operations in all 6 boroughs the police pretended not to know about. His signature could unfreeze bank accounts. His silence could freeze careers. In certain restaurants in Little Italy, the waiters still lowered their eyes when he walked in. Not out of fear exactly, but out of that older, deeper thing that fear becomes when it has been trained across generations. His face had appeared in the New York Post twice in the past year, both times under headlines the paper never dared to prove. His lawyers had made sure of that. His enemies, the ones still alive, kept a careful distance of at least 2 boroughs. People assumed he had everything, but his mansion was quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a life well lived, not the soft quiet of a home where someone was sleeping upstairs, waiting. It was the cold quiet of marble that had never known a child's footsteps. The quiet of hallways so long that footsteps echoed back before they had finished being taken. The quiet of a dining table set for 12 that had only ever seated 1. Alessandro rarely noticed it anymore. A man does not notice the temperature of a room he has been standing in for years. He worked, he gave orders, he listened to Marco, his right hand, deliver the weekly reports on shipments and rival movements. He drank espresso at 6 in the morning and whiskey at 11 at night, and in between he moved money the way other men moved chess pieces. He had not laughed, not really laughed, in a very long time. Not since his mother, Adriana Moretti, had died in his arms 9 years ago in a hospital in Sicily, whispering to him in a dialect only the 2 of them still spoke. Not since the great purge of his 29th year, the winter when 6 of his own men turned against him, and he had to look each of them in the eyes before Marco pulled the trigger, because a Moretti does not send someone else to end what began at his own table. And not since Isabella Mendez had walked out of this very mansion 3 years ago without a word, without a note, without even taking the pearl earrings he had given her the month before. He had waited 3 days for her to come back, then a week, then a month. Then he had done what a Moretti does with pain. He had buried it under so much steel and so much silence that even he sometimes forgot it was there. He had rebuilt the docks after the purge. He had rebuilt the empire brick by brick after every attack. He had not rebuilt the man. And now, in a pair of pajamas printed with tiny yellow moons, standing in the middle of that cold marble hall, a 3-year-old boy was holding out an envelope that was about to break the silence in ways Alessandro Moretti had spent 9 years making sure could never happen again. To understand how a 3-year-old boy ended up standing in the marble hall of Alessandro Moretti with a letter that would unravel everything, one had to go back almost 2 years earlier, to the morning Rosa Mendez first walked through those iron gates. Her name was Rosa Mendez. She was 30 years old. She was 5 feet 2 inches on a good day, and she weighed less than most of the copper cookware in the Moretti kitchen. She had dark hair she wore in a single braid down her back, hands that were older than the rest of her, and a way of moving through rooms that made her almost impossible to see unless you were looking for her. She had been hired as a housekeeper in the early spring of 2 years ago. Marco had been against it from the beginning. "You don't bring outsiders into this house, boss," Marco had said, standing in front of Alessandro's desk with the resume in his hand. Not now, not with the Romano situation, not with everything. Alessandro had barely looked up from his papers, then vet her. Marco had vetted her the way the Moretti family vetted every person who came within 100 feet of the boss. Background check going back to her birth in a small town in New Mexico. Financial records, every address she had ever lived at, every job she had ever held, every relative, every phone number, every neighbor. 2 of Marco's men had even sat in an unmarked car outside her tiny apartment in Astoria for 6 nights straight, watching who came in and who went out. Nobody came. Nobody went. Rosa Mendez lived alone with a small boy she was raising by herself, worked cleaning jobs to pay the rent, went to a small Catholic church on Sundays, and owed nothing to anyone. She was, by every measure Marco knew how to apply, the cleanest person who had ever set foot in that mansion. He had still not liked it, but he had signed off. She arrived every morning at 7. She left every afternoon at 4. She never lingered in doorways she was not cleaning. She never once, in almost 2 years, looked Alessandro Moretti directly in the eyes for more than 3 seconds. Her voice, when she used it, was soft enough that Marco sometimes had to ask her to repeat herself. Her good morning, sir, was a whisper meant more for the floor than the man. Alessandro rarely looked at her. He knew she was there the way a man knows the wallpaper is there, present, unchanging, not requiring his attention. But Elena, the old housekeeper who had run the Moretti kitchen since Alessandro's mother was still alive, noticed things. Elena was 71 years old and had learned during a lifetime of service that the smallest details were the loudest. And Elena noticed that Rosa Mendez sometimes stopped in the hallway outside the boss's office. Not cleaning, not passing through, just standing, one hand resting against the wall, the other pressed lightly to her chest, eyes fixed on the closed door as though she were weighing something enormous. Elena never asked. In this house, one learned not to ask. Then, one Tuesday morning in early autumn, Rosa Mendez knocked on the door of Alessandro Moretti's office, kept her eyes on his desk, and quietly asked if she might, just this once, bring her son to work. Alessandro had said yes the way a man says yes to a question he has already stopped listening to. He had waved a hand, told her it was fine for the day, and returned his attention to the file open on his desk. Rosa had thanked him twice, apologized once, and closed the door so quietly it barely made a sound. The next morning, at 7 o'clock exactly, she arrived with the boy. He was 3 years old. His name was Lucas. His hair was a soft chestnut brown, curling loosely at the ends the way children's hair does before anyone has taught it to behave. He wore a small navy jacket that was one size too big, and shoes that had clearly belonged to another child before him. Under one arm, held with the careful seriousness only a small child can bring to something small, was a wooden horse. Its paint was chipped at the mane. One of its ears was slightly shorter than the other. It looked like something that had been loved through several winters. Rosa held his other hand as though she were afraid the marble floor might swallow him if she let go. She apologized before she had even fully stepped inside. She apologized to Elena in the kitchen. She apologized to the 2 men standing near the front hall. She apologized in advance for any noise, any inconvenience, any presence at all. She promised he would sit quietly in the corner of the laundry room. She promised he would not touch anything. She promised, with a kind of quiet desperation Elena would remember for a long time afterward, that he would be no trouble. Alessandro came down the main staircase at 7:15, coffee already in hand, Marco 3 steps behind him going over the morning briefing. He glanced at the small figure standing beside Rosa in the hallway. 1 second. Meant to be nothing. Meant to be the same passing glance he would give a lamp or a coat rack. But then he stopped. Half a step. Not enough for anyone but Marco to notice, because the boy was looking up at him. And the boy was not afraid. Every person who entered this house was afraid of Alessandro Moretti. Grown men who had killed for a living lowered their voices in his presence. Lawyers with degrees from Yale rehearsed their sentences before speaking. Even Elena, after 2 decades of service, still called him sir with something like careful reverence in her mouth. The boy just looked up at him with enormous, strange eyes, gray at the outer edge and blue toward the center, and said, in a voice as clear as morning bells, "Hello, mister." Alessandro did not know how to answer for a full second longer than a man in his position ever allowed himself not to answer. "Hello," he said finally, short, neutral. Then he walked on. Marco walked behind him in silence until they reached the office. He closed the door, waited 3 heartbeats, and said, "Boss, what? Those eyes?" Alessandro looked up from his desk. "What about them?" Marco hesitated. It was not a hesitation. Alessandro had heard from him in years. "Nothing. Familiar. It's nothing." Alessandro sat down. Marco left. The files were opened. The morning briefing continued. The espresso cooled. And for the next 3 hours, Alessandro Moretti, a man who could read a 12-page contract in 15 minutes and remember every clause, could not focus on a single sentence in front of him. The next morning, Rosa apologized before she had even taken off her coat. Her sister-in-law, who usually watched Lucas, had come down with something, just for the day, just one more day. She was so sorry. Alessandro, on his way out through the front hall with Marco, waved a hand without turning. "It's fine." 2 days later, the neighbor who sometimes helped had a family emergency. Just for the day, just one more. By the end of that first week, no one had officially decided anything. But at 7 o'clock each morning, Rosa arrived with Lucas by the hand and the wooden horse tucked under his arm. And by 4 in the afternoon they left together. And somehow, without anyone signing off on it, 3 years old and quiet as a candle, Lucas had become a regular guest in the coldest house in Long Island. He never caused trouble. That was the strange part. He seemed to understand. In the way small children sometimes understand things adults have forgotten how to say, that this house required a certain gentleness. He would sit on the kitchen floor by Elena's feet and line up his wooden horse with whatever else he could find. A wine cork, a silver spoon, a small onion he had asked permission to hold. He would hum songs that had no melody, tuneless little rivers of sound that seemed to belong to him alone. Sometimes he dragged a picture book to the middle of the enormous main hallway, sat cross-legged in the vast marble echo of it, and read to no one, his small finger dragging under words he did not know yet, inventing the story as he went. Alessandro began taking longer routes through the kitchen. He told himself it was because the coffee was there, but the coffee had always been there, and he had never before decided that the shortest path between his office and his study required a detour past the pantry. Elena noticed. Elena did not say a word. Marco noticed too. Marco said one word, to himself, in the hallway on a Thursday, and the word was, him. One late afternoon, sunlight coming low through the tall windows of the main hall, Lucas stood in front of the enormous oil painting that had hung above the north staircase for as long as anyone in the house could remember. It was a Sicilian piece the Moretti family had brought over 3 generations ago. A lion, alone, resting under a bare tree on a sunburnt plain. Alessandro's grandfather had loved it. Alessandro had never really looked at it. Lucas looked at it now, tilting his head slightly, and said, in that clear, serious voice of his, "That lion is sad." Alessandro, passing through with a folder under his arm, stopped. "He doesn't have anyone," Lucas said. Alessandro did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the painting, then at the boy, then at the painting again. "He has the tree," he said finally. It came out quieter than he meant it to. Lucas considered this seriously. "A tree isn't a friend, mister." Marco was standing in the doorway of the study across the hall. He had been about to interrupt with a message from the docks. He didn't. He watched, instead, as the corner of Alessandro Moretti's mouth twitched upward. Just once. Just enough. For the first time in 3 years, Marco saw his boss almost smile. After that afternoon by the lion painting, something began to shift. Lucas started bringing him things. It began the very next morning. Alessandro was coming out of the study when a small hand tugged at the leg of his charcoal trousers. He looked down. Lucas was holding out a smooth gray pebble, no bigger than a coin. "For you, mister." Alessandro took it because he did not know what else to do with a 3-year-old holding out a rock in the middle of a 200-year-old hallway. "For luck," Lucas explained solemnly. "It's from the garden, the good part of the garden, where the flowers are." Alessandro looked at the pebble in his palm. It was warm from being held. He nodded once. Seriously, the way one businessman accepts a contract from another. "Thank you." He put the pebble in his pocket. He did not throw it away when he undressed that night. He set it on the marble dish where his cufflinks lived. 2 days later, a drawing appeared taped to the door of his office. A crayon house with a red roof and lopsided windows. In the yard, drawn in careful brown lines, stood a small wooden horse. Underneath, in the shaky uppercase letters of a child who was only just learning them, were 2 words. "For Mr." He did not take it down. Then came the yellow star. He was on a call with the head of construction on the Manhattan project. Pacing behind his desk, his voice low and controlled the way it always was when large sums of money were being decided in a single breath, Lucas had wandered in. Rosa had not noticed him slip past. He stood there watching Alessandro pace for almost a full minute before. With the enormous seriousness of a small child on an important mission, he reached up, opened his little hand, and pressed a bright yellow star sticker onto the back of Alessandro's hand. Alessandro did not stop speaking on the phone. He did not even miss a word of the sentence he was in the middle of. But he looked down. Lucas looked up. Neither of them moved. Then Lucas nodded once, satisfied with his work, and walked back out. The sticker stayed on his hand through a 30-minute call with the head of construction. It stayed on his hand through a face-to-face meeting with 3 of his lawyers in the study, all of whom saw it, and none of whom dared say a single word. It stayed on his hand until well after midnight, when he finally undressed for bed and only then, carefully, peeled it off and set it beside the pebble on the marble dish. Marco, that same afternoon, had come in with a folder and a lowered voice. "Boss, the Romano crew was seen near Pier 11 again last night. 2nd time this week. Something is moving." Alessandro listened. He said the right things. He gave the right orders. But his eyes drifted. Just once, toward the kitchen door where Lucas was giggling at something Elena had said, his little laugh cutting through the marble like something warm through ice. Marco saw the drift. Marco said nothing. That night, Alessandro stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than he usually did. The man looking back at him was somehow younger, softer around the mouth, less tired around the eyes. He did not recognize him, and for the first time in 9 years, Alessandro Moretti felt something colder than fear. He felt afraid of what he was becoming, while the master of the house was busy being afraid of the softer man in the mirror. No one in the mansion was watching the woman who had brought all of it in. Rosa Mendez had begun to arrive 5 minutes late. It was a small thing. She still arrived before anyone else on the day staff. But for a woman who had been early to every shift for 2 years straight, 5 minutes was a note in a different key. She apologized the first time. She apologized the second. By the third week, Elena stopped mentioning it, because Elena had begun to understand that Rosa was not oversleeping. There were the pauses, small ones. Rosa would be carrying a stack of folded linens down the second-floor corridor, and then she would stop, one hand pressed flat against the tall cedar cabinet, the other resting on her chest, just under the collarbone. Her eyes would close. 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then she would breathe out, straighten, and keep walking as though nothing had happened. She thought no one saw her. Elena saw her twice. Elena did not say a word. There was the small notebook she carried in the inside pocket of her uniform. Nobody knew what was in it. She wrote in it during her lunch break, sitting on the low stone bench by the kitchen garden, her handwriting small and careful. Dates, times, words in a shorthand only she could read. Monday, 10 a.m., Dr. R. Blood again. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Results. She wrote them and closed the notebook and slipped it back into her pocket and picked up her sandwich and finished eating. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Elena came into the laundry room to look for a set of napkins and found Rosa sitting on the low wooden stool with her face in her hands, shoulders shaking without a single sound. It was the silence of a woman who had learned how to cry in a house full of sleeping children years ago and never lost the habit. Elena stopped in the doorway. She set the empty basket down very quietly. Rosa heard her. She lifted her head, wiped her face with the back of her wrist in one practiced motion, and gave Elena the smallest, bravest smile Elena had ever seen on another human being. "It's nothing, ma'am. I'm fine." Elena did not believe her. But Elena also knew, from a lifetime of service in houses full of secrets, that some doors are not yours to open. She nodded once and left the room. In the afternoons, when the light began to slant gold across the marble, Rosa would kneel down in the front hall to help Lucas into his little navy jacket, and she would hold him a moment longer than she had the day before, her chin on his soft chestnut curls, her arms tight around his small back. Lucas, who was 3, would sometimes wiggle to be let go. She would laugh softly and release him. Alessandro did not see any of this. He was inside his study with Marco and 2 of his lieutenants, spread over a map of the Brooklyn waterfront, marking positions in red pencil, planning how to meet whatever the Romano family was about to bring to his docks. That night, in her small apartment in Astoria under the warm yellow glow of a single kitchen lamp, Rosa sat at her narrow table with a sheet of cream-colored paper and a pen that trembled in her hand. She wrote for almost 2 hours. Twice, she stopped to press a napkin to her eyes so the ink would not run. When she was finished, she folded the letter carefully into thirds, slid it into a cream envelope, sealed it, and tucked it deep into the inside pocket of Lucas's little navy jacket, where a 3-year-old would never think to look. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The sky over Long Island was pale gray, the kind that could not decide whether to rain. Rosa had arrived at 7:06. Elena had noticed. Elena had said nothing. Lucas, still sleepy, had been settled on the kitchen floor with his wooden horse and a small cup of warm milk. Rosa had climbed the north staircase with a soft cloth in one hand and a bottle of polish in the other, to work on the mahogany banister as she did every Tuesday. She was halfway up when she folded. There was no scream, no stumble, no warning. Her knees simply gave out beneath her, and she came down against the marble steps with the soft, terrible sound of a body that had stopped fighting. The bottle of polish rolled 3 steps down and stopped against the wall. Lucas heard the sound from the kitchen. Only Lucas heard it. He came around the corner, still holding the wooden horse. He saw his mother lying on the stairs. Something inside a 3-year-old understands things faster than words. He screamed. Not a tantrum scream. A high, wounded, terrified scream that pierced through the whole east wing of the mansion. "Mommy! Mommy!" Elena came running from the kitchen, one hand already on her chest. She took one look at the crumpled figure on the stairs and shouted louder than she had shouted in 20 years of service. "Mr. Moretti, come now." Alessandro was in his study. The map of the docks was open. Marco was mid-sentence. He heard Elena's voice, and something in the register of it, something he had never heard from that woman before, made him move before his brain had finished processing why. He came out of the study at a run. He had not run for anyone who was not trying to kill him in 9 years. He took the front hall in 5 strides. He was on the staircase in 2 more. He dropped to one knee beside Rosa. Her skin was the color of old paper. Her pulse under his fingers was fast and thin, like a bird's. Lucas was clinging to her shoulder, sobbing, still holding the wooden horse. Alessandro did not wait for an ambulance. He did not wait for Marco. He gathered Rosa into his arms as though she weighed nothing, because she did weigh nothing, and he carried her down the stairs and out the front door and into the passenger seat of his own black sedan. Marco, the boy, in the back. Marco lifted Lucas in. Lucas immediately grabbed the sleeve of Alessandro's jacket and did not let go. Alessandro drove. He ran 3 red lights on the parkway. He passed a police cruiser at 90 miles an hour on the shoulder and did not slow down. Lucas held his sleeve the entire way, whispering, over and over, "Mommy, Mommy." At Long Island Jewish Hospital, they took her from him in seconds. Nurses, a gurney, a set of double doors that swung and stopped him. He stood in the white corridor for 42 minutes. When the doctor came out, a woman with kind, tired eyes, she asked him to step aside. She spoke quietly. She spoke the words very carefully. "Mr. Moretti, Miss Mendez has been living with acute leukemia, late stage. She has been in treatment for many months." Alessandro said nothing. He felt something strike his chest from the inside. Through the glass panel of the room down the hall, he could see Lucas, sitting on a plastic chair beside the bed, small feet not touching the floor, the wooden horse still clutched tight against his chest. The doctor said she might have a few hours. She said it the way doctors say those things when they have said them too many times to make it sound like anything but weather. Rosa woke around 6 in the evening. Alessandro stood in the corridor outside the room. He did not go in. He did not have a reason he could give himself for why. The most powerful man in New York, a man who had walked into rooms full of armed enemies without breaking stride, stood on the wrong side of a hospital door because he did not know how to be present at what was about to happen inside. Through the glass, he watched. Rosa's eyes opened slowly. She saw Lucas first. Something on her face changed in a way that had nothing to do with pain. She smiled, small, real. She lifted one hand, thin as paper now, and beckoned him closer. Lucas climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed. He was still holding the wooden horse. He set it down on the pillow beside her head so it could see too. Rosa whispered something into his ear. Alessandro could not hear the words. He could see Lucas's small face grow serious in the way only a 3-year-old's face can grow serious. The whole world compressed into one solemn assignment. His enormous gray-blue eyes did not blink. Rosa stroked his soft chestnut curls. She spoke again, low and careful, and Alessandro read the shape of her mouth through the glass more than he heard her. "Do you remember, my love? If Mommy has to go far away, you take the envelope, the one inside your jacket, inside pocket. You give it to Mr. Alessandro, your own hands. You promise, Mommy?" Lucas nodded. Once, twice, then a 3rd time, because he wanted her to be sure. Rosa kissed the top of his head. She held him there for a long moment, her lips pressed into his curls, her eyes closed. Then she looked up, straight through the glass panel of the door, straight at Alessandro Moretti. Their eyes met. And Rosa Mendez, for the first time in 2 years, smiled at her employer. Not the small, nervous smile she gave when he passed her in the hallway, not the deferential curve of the mouth she used when handing him folded shirts. A real smile, quiet, grateful, almost tender. A smile that had been waiting 2 years to be spent. He raised one hand slowly and pressed it flat against the glass. She closed her eyes. She did not open them again. At 2:40 in the morning, a nurse came out and told him gently that Miss Mendez had gone in her sleep. He nodded once. He did not speak. He walked into the room. Lucas was asleep on the plastic chair, folded sideways, one arm around the wooden horse, the other tucked under his cheek. Alessandro sat down on the chair next to him. He rested one large hand on the small shoulder and left it there. He did not move it for the rest of the night. Around 4 in the morning, the light in the corridor shifted. Alessandro looked down. Lucas's face was turned toward him, mouth slightly open in sleep. His eyes were closed. But Alessandro had seen them awake all night, gray at the edges, blue toward the center, set slightly wide apart. For the first time, in the exhausted white quiet of that hospital room, Alessandro Moretti realized whose eyes those were. He did not let himself finish the thought. They buried Rosa Mendez 3 days later, in a small Catholic cemetery on the eastern edge of Queens. The sky was a low, undecided gray. A thin drizzle that could not quite commit to being rain fell in slow diagonal lines. the kind of weather that seemed to have shown up out of respect and then not known what to do with itself. There were not many people. 2 neighbors from the Astoria building, an older woman in a black shawl, and a younger one holding a folded umbrella she never opened. A priest who had known Rosa only from Sunday mornings, but who spoke about her as if he had known her all his life, because Rosa had been the kind of woman a person felt they knew after a single greeting. Elena stood at the front, small in a long dark coat, her hands folded over a rosary that had belonged to her mother. Marco stood 2 steps behind Alessandro, silent, hands clasped in front of him, eyes moving over the perimeter out of habit that would not turn off even here. Alessandro stood at the graveside in a black overcoat, no umbrella, letting the drizzle settle in his hair. Lucas stood beside him in a black jacket at least 2 sizes too large, sleeves rolled up twice, small hand swallowed in Alessandro's larger one. Under his other arm, exactly where it had been every day of his short life, was the wooden horse. Lucas did not cry. He watched the coffin the way a child watches something he has been told is important but cannot yet fit inside his understanding. His enormous gray-blue eyes did not blink through the whole prayer. He listened to the priest. He watched the men lower the wooden box on ropes into the ground. When the priest finished and stepped back, Lucas tilted his head up. "Mister," he said quietly, "is Mommy going far for a long time?" Alessandro Moretti, a man who had answered every question ever put to him with certainty, opened his mouth and found that nothing came out. He closed his mouth. He tightened his hand around the boy's tiny one. "Yes," he said finally. His voice came out lower than he meant it to. "For a long time." Lucas nodded slowly, as though filing this away for later consideration, and turned his eyes back to the grave. After the last of the mourners had gone, Elena stepped close to Alessandro and lowered her voice. "Sir, Miss Rosa has no other family here in New York. Only the boy. What do we do?" Alessandro did not take his eyes off Lucas, who was crouching now to place a small handful of wet earth over the coffin with the same seriousness he did everything. "He comes home with me," Alessandro said. "For now." Elena nodded. She did not ask what for now meant. She had learned, in nearly 2 decades in that house, that for now in the Moretti household sometimes lasted a lifetime. Marco glanced sideways at his boss. Just a look. He said nothing. He did not have to. The drive back to Long Island was silent. The tires hissed on wet asphalt. The wipers moved in slow, steady arcs. Halfway home, Lucas fell asleep against Alessandro's shoulder, still holding the wooden horse, his small breath warm and even against the wool of the black overcoat. Somewhere on the parkway, Alessandro realized he had not taken a breath in 5 minutes. He inhaled, very carefully, so as not to wake the boy. The next morning, the sun came back, weak, watery, the color of pale honey through the tall windows of the east sitting room. Alessandro was already awake by 6. He had not slept more than an hour. He sat in the deep leather armchair beside the bay window, still in yesterday's shirt with the collar unbuttoned, a cup of espresso cooling untouched on the table beside him. He was looking at nothing. He was looking at everything. He was looking at 3 years of his own life through a window he had not opened in a very long time. At 7:40, he heard small footsteps on the marble. Lucas came in slowly, wearing a set of soft blue pajamas Elena had found for him in a spare drawer, printed with tiny yellow moons. His chestnut curls were pressed flat on one side from sleeping. He had the wooden horse under his left arm, as always. In his right hand, held out slightly in front of him with both his elbows careful and stiff, was a cream envelope, crumpled at the edges. He stopped 3 steps from the armchair. He looked up at Alessandro with those enormous gray-blue eyes, and the whole world of a 3-year-old bearing an assignment sat on his small shoulders. "Mister," he whispered, "Mommy told me, if she went far, I give this to you." He lifted the envelope higher. "With my own hands, I promised." Alessandro did not move. He heard the whisper. He heard the promise. He heard, underneath both, the voice of Rosa Mendez in a hospital room the night before last, shaping words through a glass panel. He held out his hand. It was not entirely steady. He noticed this with a strange, distant surprise, because Alessandro Moretti's hands did not shake. They had not shaken when he signed his first contract at 22. They had not shaken during the Great Purge at 29. They had not shaken when Isabella walked out of this house 3 years ago. They shook now. Lucas placed the envelope into his palm with tremendous care, the way a small child hands over a butterfly. Then he stepped back 1 step and folded his little hands over the wooden horse and waited. He was waiting to be released from his duty. Alessandro understood this without being told. "Thank you, Lucas," he said quietly. "You did very well." Lucas nodded, satisfied. and climbed up onto the rug beside the armchair and began arranging the wooden horse on the carpet, as though he had just successfully delivered a message from one nation to another and could now return to being three. Alessandro looked at the envelope. Cream paper, slightly damp at one corner. His own name written across the front in small, careful handwriting he now recognized from every folded shirt returned to his drawer for 2 years. Mr. Alessandro Moretti. He slid one finger under the flap. It opened easily, as though it had been waiting. He unfolded the paper. Rosa's handwriting was small and even, the way everything about her had been, trembling in a few places where the pen had lost its way. He read the first line. He stopped. He read it again, and a third time, because the words refused to arrange themselves into anything his mind could accept. Mr. Moretti, there is a truth I have carried for 3 years. Lucas is not my son. The next line took the last of the air out of his lungs. He is your son. Alessandro Moretti sat very still in the leather armchair by the window. Around him, the world went on. Somewhere a clock ticked. Somewhere the espresso cooled a little more. On the rug 3 feet away, Lucas made small, quiet horse sounds and walked the wooden horse in careful figure eights across the pattern. He kept reading. Rosa's handwriting steadied on the second page, the way a voice steadies when it has already said the hardest thing. She wrote that her older sister, Isabella Mendez, was the woman Alessandro had loved 3 years ago. She wrote that Isabella had not left him because she wanted to. She had left because she was afraid, and because a week after she walked out of that mansion, she discovered she was carrying his child. She wrote that Isabella had known better than anyone what Alessandro's world would do to a child. She had known the names of the men who wanted him dead. She had known the doorways that were watched. She had known that a Moretti heir carried in her body was a target the moment anyone in that world learned of him. So she had done the only thing she believed a mother could do. She had disappeared. Rosa wrote that Isabella had gone to Boston. She had rented a small apartment above a bakery in the North End. She had worked quietly, taken cleaning jobs, waited. She had given birth to Lucas alone on a February night in a hospital where she had used her mother's maiden name. And she had been sick. That part Rosa wrote slowly, the ink pressing harder, as though the pen itself did not want to hold it. Isabella had been born with a congenital heart condition she had hidden from Alessandro through every month they were together, because she had not wanted him to look at her the way people looked at things that were breaking. The pregnancy, and then the birth, had taken from her what remained. She had lasted 11 months after Lucas was born. Before she went, she had brought Lucas from Boston to Rosa's apartment in Astoria. She had placed him in her sister's arms. She had told Rosa the name of the boy's father. She had made Rosa swear that Lucas would grow up loved and safe, and that one day, if Rosa could find a way, that he would know his father. Rosa wrote that 2 years ago, she had not taken the job in the Moretti mansion by accident. She had applied on purpose. She had prayed on the subway ride to the interview. She had walked through those iron gates with a photograph of her sister folded in her wallet, and a promise burning under her ribs. She had wanted Lucas to grow up near his father, even if only in the shadow of the same house. Even if his father never knew. Even if she never dared to say, "Forgive me, Mr. Moretti. I have taken from you 3 years of your son's life. I did not know how to give them back to you without endangering him. I am sorry. If you have any love left in that quiet house of yours, please, please, love this boy for me and for Isabella. He is all that either of us has ever done that was truly good." Alessandro laid the letter carefully on the small side table. His hands were trembling. On the rug in the sunlight, Lucas walked the wooden horse in another slow figure eight and hummed a song with no melody. He did not tell anyone. Not that day. Not the next. He called Marco into the study that evening and closed the door. "I need something done quietly. Just you. No one else." Marco, who had known him for 11 years and had learned to read the shape of his silences, only nodded. A DNA test. The boy. Discreet. Nothing on paper with his name. Marco did not ask why. He did not have to. He had seen the eyes. He had wondered privately for 3 weeks. He nodded once and left. The next morning, Marco set a small glass of apple juice in front of Lucas at the kitchen counter. Later, quietly, he took the empty glass and a small child's toothbrush from the guest bathroom. He slipped both into a padded envelope and drove them into Manhattan himself, to a private laboratory in a building on Madison Avenue that did not display its name on the door. 3 days, they told him. 3 days for the expedited result. 3 days felt like 3 years. Alessandro did not sleep, not really. He worked late in the study every night. Marco brought him food he did not eat. Elena brought him coffee that went cold. Around 3 in the morning on each of those nights, Alessandro opened the second drawer of his desk, the one that had a false bottom, and took out a small photograph he had not looked at in 3 years. Isabella Mendez, 27 years old in the picture, standing on the terrace of this very mansion, laughing at something he had said, her dark hair loose over one shoulder. Her eyes, gray at the outer edges and blue toward the center, catching the last light of a summer evening. He remembered her laugh. He remembered the way she had pressed her hand to his chest one night in this house and said, "Sandro, promise me if I ever have to disappear, you will let me go." He had thought she meant if his enemies came. He had never thought she meant something else. He remembered the last night. The way she had stood at the doorway with one small suitcase. The way she had looked at him for one long second. The way pride had kept his mouth shut. The way he had let her walk out and had not, even once in 3 years, gone to look for her. On Friday afternoon at 3:17, Marco knocked on the study door and stepped in with a sealed envelope in his hand. "Boss." Alessandro looked up. He held out his hand. Marco placed the envelope in it and left without a word, closing the door behind him. Alessandro opened it. The paper was clinical, cold, full of columns and numbers he did not read. He read only one line: probability of paternity, 99.99%. He sat unmoving for a very long time. The clock on the mantel ticked past 4, past 4:30, past 5. Then he stood up. He walked out of the study. He walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen, where Lucas was standing on tiptoe on a small stool, trying to reach a jar of biscuits on the second shelf, one arm still wrapped tightly around the wooden horse. Alessandro reached him in 3 steps. He lifted the boy off the stool, jar and all, and folded him into his arms and pressed his face into the soft chestnut curls. For the first time in 3 years, Alessandro Moretti wept, silent, shoulders shaking, into the hair of his own son. Lucas, after a startled second, wrapped both small arms around his neck. "Mister," he whispered gravely, "you smell like Mommy when she cries." He called his lawyer the next morning, not for a business transaction, not for a hostile takeover, not for the quiet legal chess he played every other week of his life, for something he had never once, in 38 years, asked a lawyer to prepare: paternity acknowledgement, formal recognition, every document, every signature, every seal necessary to establish, in the eyes of the state of New York, that Lucas Mendez was in fact Lucas Moretti, sole heir of Alessandro Moretti, only son, only child. The lawyer, a careful man who had worked for the Moretti family for 20 years, did not ask a single question. He simply began drafting. Alessandro moved through the following weeks like a man who had been given back a piece of himself he had not known was missing. He converted the largest guest suite on the second floor into a room for Lucas. He hired painters and had the walls repainted a soft, dusty blue, the color of the morning sky over Sicily in early spring. He filled the shelves with picture books, some of them chosen after long, careful conversations with a woman at a bookstore in Manhattan who had grown children of her own and did not know who he was. On the highest, most honored shelf, positioned above everything else, he placed the wooden horse. He took Lucas out for ice cream for the first time on a Saturday afternoon at a small shop in Roslyn. Lucas chose strawberry. He chose vanilla. Lucas got most of the strawberry on his face. Alessandro laughed. Actually laughed. It surprised him more than it surprised the woman behind the counter. He tried to cut Lucas's hair one evening because Lucas said he wanted Mister to do it. This was a mild disaster. The left side ended up shorter than the right. Elena, brought in as emergency consultant, put both hands on her hips and shook her head, and then had to turn her face away because she was trying not to cry. At night, Alessandro read to him before bed. His voice was stiff. He held the books at slightly the wrong angle. He mispronounced the names of animals in one book because he had never read a picture book aloud in his life. But he read. Every night. Slowly getting better, Lucas fell asleep against his shoulder more often than not. Elena walked into the sitting room one Sunday afternoon to find Alessandro Moretti on the floor. Actually on the floor. Suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, sitting cross-legged on the rug, patiently building a Lego tower with his son. She stood in the doorway with one hand pressed to her mouth. She had served this house for 19 years. She had loved his mother. She had watched him grow from a serious 10-year-old into the man who ruled Brooklyn. She wept quietly into her apron and did not let him see. Marco, who had known Alessandro for 11 years and had never once seen him laugh with his whole chest, walked past the sitting room, saw the Lego tower, saw Lucas placing a small red brick very seriously on top, saw his boss make a sound of exaggerated awe, and laughed out loud in the hallway. But that same night, in the study, Marco set his glass down and lowered his voice. "Boss, we have a problem. Vincent Romano knows." Alessandro's hand tightened around his whiskey. "How?" "In our world, no secret lasts more than 7 days." His enemy had just found the one weakness he had not had for 3 years. Vincent Romano was 52 years old. He had been at war with the Moretti family for most of his adult life. His father had lost the docks to Alessandro's father in the winter of 1991. His older brother had lost his life on those same docks 8 years out later, when Alessandro was still a young man learning the shape of the empire he would inherit. Vincent had inherited the grudge the way other men inherited watches. He had polished it every day for 3 decades. He had been waiting for a crack, any crack. For 3 years, Alessandro Moretti had been a wall with no seams, no mistress, no liability, no child. Just a cold, brilliant man behind cold, brilliant iron gates. And now, suddenly, there was a boy. Vincent got the confirmation on a Tuesday. A discreet source in a discreet laboratory on Madison Avenue. A number and a name. Lucas, 3 years old, sole living heir of the Moretti bloodline. The crack in the wall Vincent Romano had waited 30 years to find. He called his captains that night. They came to his warehouse in Red Hook, 12 of them, standing in a half-circle around a metal desk with a single lamp burning above it. Vincent did not raise his voice. He never had to. Moretti has something to lose now. For the first time in a decade, we move. The first night, the largest Moretti warehouse on the Brooklyn waterfront went up in orange flame. 3 hours of it. Half a city block lit red against the East River. 2 of Marco's dockmen were injured. None killed, but the loss on paper ran into 8 figures. The second night, 2 of the Moretti front restaurants in Little Italy were struck almost simultaneously. Car bombs in the delivery alleys behind them. The kitchens were empty at that hour. Vincent had made sure of that. He wanted damage, not martyrs. Not yet. He wanted Alessandro to feel it. The third night, they came for the hotel, the tall Moretti Tower on West 54th, 23 stories of glass and old marble, 3 private floors reserved for family business. Vincent sent 18 men in through the service entrance, a coordinated push meant to sweep the private floors and plant a flag in the throat of the empire. But Alessandro had been ready. Marco had begun preparing the night after the first fire. He had known Vincent would escalate. He had known where and how. He had positioned 22 of the Moretti family's most experienced men on the private floors of that hotel 2 nights early, in silence, sleeping in shifts. The Romano push was broken by the 3rd floor. Marco led the counter himself. It was fast, it was ugly, and it was final. 9 of the Romano men were killed. The rest fled through the service exit into the alley, and into the arms of another 6 Moretti soldiers waiting by the dumpsters. Only 3 made it out of Manhattan alive to bring the news back to Red Hook. Alessandro came home to Long Island at 4 in the morning. His shirt was dark down one sleeve with someone else's blood. He did not go to the study. He did not pour a drink. He walked upstairs, opened the door to the dusty blue room, and stood in the doorway for a long moment. Lucas was asleep on his side, wooden horse tucked under one arm, breath soft and even. Alessandro walked in quietly, pulled the blanket up over the small shoulder, and rested one hand briefly on the chestnut curls. Across the harbor, in the dark of the Red Hook warehouse, Vincent Romano sat alone with a glass of grappa and whispered to the lamp, "If I cannot beat him with guns, I will beat him with the boy." Saturday morning came bright and cool, the kind of morning Rosa would have loved. Long slants of pale gold light across the lawn, dew still on the grass, a soft wind moving through the tall oaks at the eastern edge of the property. Elena had asked at breakfast if she might take the boy out to the small enclosed garden park at the back of the estate. It was fenced. It had a swing set Alessandro had installed the week after the DNA result. 2 armed men stood watch at the gate at all times. It was, by every calculation the Moretti family had ever made, the safest 3 acres in the state of New York. Alessandro nodded. He was already late for a 9 o'clock in the study with 3 of his senior lieutenants. Marco was on the docks. He kissed the top of Lucas's head at the door, told him to be a good boy for Miss Elena, and went upstairs. Elena took Lucas by the hand. He was carrying the wooden horse. Of course, he always was. They walked down the gravel path together, Elena at his pace, Lucas humming one of his tuneless little songs. The small white truck that pulled up along the service road behind the eastern fence had a florist's logo on the side. A delivery, apparently, for the kitchen. The gate guard, a man named Enzo who had worked for the Moretti family for 6 years, walked over to check the paperwork. The suppressed round caught him under the jaw before he had finished reaching for the clipboard. The second guard, Gino, turned at the sound that was not quite a sound and had time to draw his weapon. He did not have time to raise it. 2 rounds. He went down beside the fence. Elena screamed. She threw herself over Lucas. A gloved hand caught her by the collar of her coat and struck her once, across the temple with the butt of a pistol. She went down onto the grass without another sound. Lucas was lifted off his feet. The wooden horse fell from his small hand and rolled twice on the wet grass and stopped. One carved ear turned up toward the sky. The white truck was gone in 90 seconds. Marco called Alessandro at 9:14. Alessandro was mid-sentence in the study, standing at the head of the long table with his lieutenants seated around it. He picked up. He heard 3 words. He did not hear the rest. He was already moving. He took the main staircase 3 at a time. He crossed the eastern lawn at a run. He saw Elena being helped up by 2 of his men. Blood at her hairline. He saw the 2 bodies by the fence. He saw the tire tracks in the wet earth. He saw the wooden horse on the grass. He picked it up. It was wet with dew. He stood there holding it for a long moment. His face did not change, but something in him that had softened over the last 8 weeks turned back to iron in a single heartbeat. The call came at 10:14. Vincent Romano's voice was calm, almost warm. "Mr. Moretti, sign over every territory, every dock, every hotel, every operation, 48 hours, and I will return your son, intact." Alessandro listened in silence. When he spoke, his voice was colder than Marco had ever heard it in 11 years of service. "You have just chosen the day you die, Romano." He hung up. He turned to Marco. "Every man." Now, for the first time in 10 years, the head of the Moretti family was going to the front himself. Marco moved like a man possessed. By 11 that morning, every asset the Moretti family had ever cultivated was activated. Every dock worker on their payroll, every night porter in every hotel between Manhattan and Yonkers, every parking attendant, every dispatcher, every retired officer of the NYPD who owed them a favor, and every current one who owed them silence. Every debt the family had held in reserve for a decade was called in that morning. By 1 in the afternoon, a picture was forming. A white delivery truck matching the description had been seen entering the Queensboro Bridge at 9:21. It had been logged by 3 separate street cameras before it disappeared. A second vehicle, a black sedan, had picked up its route in the eastern edge of the Bronx. By 3, they had 3 possible locations. The first was a Romano-owned garage in Yonkers. The second was a disused meatpacking facility in Long Island City. The third was an abandoned warehouse on a building the Romanos had officially sold 4 years ago, but which one of Marco's men swore was still being paid for through a shell company registered in New Jersey. Alessandro stood over the map in the study with his palms flat on the wood. He had not eaten. He had not sat down. He looked at each of the 3 red pins in turn. "Vincent will not honor the trade," he said quietly. "He never has." Marco did not need reminding. He remembered 3 names, 3 men over the years who had trusted a Vincent Romano promise. 3 bodies that had come back in 3 different rivers. Alessandro tapped the 3rd pin. The Bronx warehouse. He wants the boy far from Manhattan, far from the docks, far from anywhere I would think to look, and he wants a building his own men still know. Marco nodded once. By 7 that evening the strike team was assembled. 12 men, the most experienced the family had. Alessandro would lead them himself. There had been quiet objection in the ranks. There had been direct objection from Marco. Alessandro had shut it down with a single look. The rain began at 8:40, heavy, cold, the kind of rain that swallowed the sound of engines and drowned the amber streetlights of the northern Bronx. At 9:15, they left the compound in 3 unmarked black vehicles. Alessandro sat in the back of the second one, in a dark coat, checking the magazine of his sidearm by feel because he did not need to look. Marco sat across from him. The city outside the window blurred by in silver streaks of rain. Alessandro looked at Marco for a long moment. "If I do not come back tonight," he said quietly. "Boss, listen to me." Marco listened. "Lucas goes to my mother's sister in Palermo. She is old, but she is strong. He grows up there, not in this world. He does not learn our business. He does not learn our names. He learns music and books and how to be a boy. You will make sure of it." Marco's jaw tightened. His eyes went red at the edges. He nodded. "Yes, boss." Alessandro turned his face to the rain-blurred window. He watched the wet lights of New York smear past, and for the first time since his mother had died in his arms 9 years ago in Sicily, Alessandro Moretti prayed. He prayed to a God he had not spoken to in a very long time that the son he had only just been given would not be taken from him tonight. They breached the warehouse at 3 a.m. The rain had thickened to a low, drumming curtain. The industrial belt of the northern Bronx was a landscape of black metal roofs and dead sodium lamps. Marco's men had taken the 4 exits an hour earlier, moving in wet silence, cutting phone lines, disabling 2 parked vehicles. The building was sealed before its occupants understood they were surrounded. Alessandro went in through the loading bay door with the first team of 4. The first shot came from the mezzanine. It caught the concrete beside his shoulder and sent a plume of gray dust into the dark. He did not slow. He moved along the eastern wall, like a shadow that had been rehearsed for exactly this hallway, sidearm level, breathing controlled. 1 Romano gunman leaned out from a stack of shipping pallets. Alessandro fired once. The man went down between the pallets and did not rise. The warehouse erupted. Muzzle flashes strobed across the tall interior. Rounds cracked off steel beams. Somewhere a fuel canister ruptured and released a slow cough of chemical smoke. Broken glass rained down from a shattered upper window. Marco's teams pushed in from the 2 side entrances, funneling the remaining Romano men into a narrowing corner near the office wall. Alessandro moved through it the way water moves through stone. He did not shout. He did not miss. He crossed 30 feet of open floor under fire and reached the small interior office on the far side, 2 men outside its door. He took the first at 7 yards, the second at 4. He kicked the door open. Vincent Romano was inside. Vincent had heard the walls collapsing around him. He knew exactly what this meant. He had had less than a minute to prepare. He had used it to drag Lucas out of the small back room by the arm, and he was standing now in the center of the office with the boy pulled tight against his hip, a pistol pressed hard to the side of the small chestnut curls. Lucas's eyes were closed. Tears were dried on his cheeks. He was very still, the kind of still small children become when their bodies have already understood what their minds cannot. "Moretti," Vincent said. His voice was breathing hard. "Drop the gun. Drop it." Alessandro did not drop the gun. He raised it slowly, 2 hands, level, steady as marble. "Vincent, I will kill him. You will not." Lucas's eyelids fluttered. He opened his eyes. In the low warehouse light, he searched the shape in the doorway. He found the face. Recognition moved through his small features like a candle being lit inside a house. His lips moved without sound. "Papa." Alessandro's heart stopped for half a second. Then he fired. 1 round. A single clean crack in the smoke. The bullet entered Vincent Romano's forehead exactly between the eyes and exited the back of his skull. The gun fell from his hand before his body understood it had been killed. He went down sideways and did not move again. Alessandro crossed the office in 3 strides and caught Lucas before the boy could fold. He lifted him off the floor and pressed his face into the soft curls and held him. "Papa is here," he whispered. "Papa is here. Papa is here." Lucas was shaking, but he was whole. Marco's teams finished the rest of the Romano organization inside the hour. By the time the first gray light broke over the Bronx and the rain began to thin to a mist, the Romano name was a closed file. The war was over. 3 months passed. The Moretti mansion was no longer a museum of quiet marble. In the mornings, small feet ran the long east corridor at speeds Elena had officially declared unsafe and unofficially adored. In the afternoons, the sound of a 3-year-old boy laughing echoed from the back garden, where Alessandro had installed a small wooden playhouse painted the same dusty blue as the bedroom upstairs. Elena, who had begun to speak to Lucas with the exact tone she had once used with Alessandro himself as a boy, could be heard scolding him lovingly for tracking mud from the tulip beds onto the new hallway rug. Lucas would apologize with tremendous seriousness, holding the wooden horse against his chest, and Elena would pretend to be very cross for exactly 3 seconds before her face gave her away. Alessandro was changing too. He began to step back from the parts of the family business that lived in shadow. Marco was elevated. Contracts were rewritten. Trusted lieutenants were promoted. Meetings that once required Alessandro's personal presence were now handled without him. He turned his focus, quietly and deliberately, to the parts of the empire that lived in daylight: real estate, legitimate hospitality, construction, development. He established a scholarship fund in the name of Isabella Mendez, dedicated to children who had lost their mothers young. It funded education from grade school through university for any child accepted. There was no press release. There was no ribbon cutting. The application form simply existed, quietly, on a website nobody knew he owned. In Queens, on a small, quiet street not far from the cemetery where Rosa was buried, he purchased a building and converted it, over 8 weeks, into a hospice center for late-stage cancer patients who could not afford care. Free beds, free medication, free counseling for the families. At the entrance, Set into the stone wall beside the door was a small, polished plaque of white marble. It read simply, "In memory of Rosa Mendez, who never asked for anything." No announcement, no cameras. He walked in one afternoon, saw the plaque set into the wall, ran his fingers over the letters, and walked out again. Marco asked him about it one evening in the study, over 2 glasses of something dark and old. Why the fund? Why the hospice? Why now? Alessandro looked at his glass for a long moment. Because someone once taught me, just because a person does not complain, it does not mean they are okay. Marco did not answer. He raised his glass. Alessandro raised his. They drank in silence. That night, upstairs in the dusty blue bedroom, Alessandro sat on the floor with his back against the side of the bed and his son beside him. On the rug between them, a large plastic bin of Lego bricks had been overturned with great ceremony. Lucas was building a house. It had a red roof, 1 lopsided window, a green rectangle for a yard, and, planted very carefully in the middle of the yard, a single yellow flower. "For Mommy," Lucas said, without looking up, "and for Mama Isabella." Both flowers in 1 flower. Alessandro's hand paused on the brick he was holding. He nodded slowly. He set the brick down beside his son's small hand. "That is a very good flower, Lucas. And here, dear friends, is where the story of Alessandro Moretti and his son quietly comes to rest. If this story reached somewhere deep inside you tonight, please do the storyteller one small kindness. Look, the one who never complains, the one who always shows up, the one whose smile might be hiding more than you know. Ask them how they truly are. Wait for the real answer. It costs nothing. It might mean everything. The most important currency in this world has never been money. It has been attention. It has been presence. It has been the choice to truly see another human being before they disappear. Rosa Mendez did not ask for recognition. Isabella Mendez did not ask for rescue. They asked only that a small boy be loved. And in that love, they saved a man who had forgotten how to feel warmth in his own home. If this story moved you, please take 1 second to tap the like button. It helps so much more than you know. If you are new here, please subscribe, because this channel exists to share stories that remind us what it means to be human. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight. You never know whose Rosa is quietly walking beside them. Down in the comments, the storyteller would love to know. Which part of this story reached you the most? Is there someone quiet in your life you are going to look at differently after tonight? Every single comment is read. Every single word matters. To every soul watching this tonight, from every city and every country, thank you, truly. May your health be strong. May your days be peaceful. May the people you love come home safely to you. May you be the one who looks. May you be the one who stays. Until the next story, take care of your heart and take care of the quiet ones around you. Good night, dear friends. See you in the next video.